Could you maybe outline a little bit for us what are the different maybe sects of Judaism, the most popular ones, and kind of what differentiates them?
There are probably four main streams of Judaism. We tend to use the word stream as opposed to sect. Because we all recognize each other as Jews, we don't necessarily agree on our theology, but we all are celebrating the same holidays and the same festivals, and most of the values are exactly the same. The debate comes on some of the, I don't know, finer points or origin stories of things things like that. So we'd start with the oldest. The oldest, which was all that existed up until about 200 years ago, is what we refer today as Orthodox Judaism.
Okay.
Orthodox Judaism, traditional Judaism, teaches that the 5 books of Moses that we have today were given to Moses by God on Mount Sinai, word for word, and the text that we have today is exactly the same text that Moses was given up on the mountain. And therefore, the text is, because it is divine, is perfect and automatically correct, and that anything that is incorrect or seems contradictory in the text has to do with our inability to understand it, as opposed to the fact that the text itself might be inconsistent. And they tend to be the most traditional in terms of practice and style. One of the groups people see most frequently, like on television or in the movies, are what we refer to as the ultra-Orthodox, which is the side curls, the fancy hats.
Would the Hasidic fall under that category?
Yes, the Hasidic are part of that group, but there are multiple groups that fall into this ultra-Orthodox category. Okay. But they're going to see the world relatively similar to the mainstream Orthodox Jews, just their practice is going to be a little stricter. Okay. In terms of they will follow the determinations of their rabbi as opposed to a more broad spectrum of people. There is the second group that was started was the Reform movement, which is where I come from, which is a liberal movement of Judaism, and it comes out of post-Enlightenment Germany. It was about trying to answer the question of how could one be German or a citizen of the world and a Jew at the same time, especially since post-Enlightenment, Jews gained opportunities that they had never had previously. So, for example, all of a sudden Jews were now allowed to be voting citizens. They could attend university. They could hold certain jobs that were never available to us as a community before. And so that started to break down the walls of the ghetto. And so people tried to figure out, well, how can I live in both worlds at once? And so the Reform movement came out as a more liberal movement and is trying to understand how does God want us to live? But with the big difference would be the origin of the biblical material. So I would say we believe that something happened at Mount Sinai, that there was a revelation. What I would then say is then it gets passed down through human hands, and nobody with any ill will, but to serve their needs, to make sense in their time, the text gets tweaked. The same thing that happens when you play, a game of telephone, right? Yes, there's always usually one person who does it just to mess it up. But if you assume that there's goodwill on most people's part, they had certain things that were important to them that they wanted to stress, and that we're playing or interested in not only what does the letter of the law say, but what does the spirit of the law say. And that sometimes there is a debate which becomes more important, the letter or the spirit. And so the Reform movement also broke down some of the barriers in terms of equality. In Orthodox synagogues, men and women sit separately. In Reform synagogues, families will sit together, men and women will sit together. Orthodox congregations will not have female rabbis or female cantors, whereas the Reform movement has been training and ordaining females for over 45, 50 years.
Okay.
And so because our understanding of where the texts come from and how the world changes is somewhat different. Coming out as a kind of an outgrowth of the early Reform movement came the conservative movement, a uniquely American movement that tried to maintain tries to maintain that balance between the tradition of orthodoxy and the reform of the reformers. It is a movement that says it still accepts Torah from Sinai, but tends to be able to create arguments that will allow it to become more modern at the same time. There too, they tend to be egalitarian congregations, but however, not all. In fact, we actually share our building. We have a congregation that rents space from us that is a conservative congregation. Our bigger service is going to be a Friday evening. Their bigger service is Saturday morning, so we can share the space together. And for the most part, we don't step on each other's toes. And we can do a number of things together because we all recognize the fact that we're celebrating some of the same things. There is a fourth movement in Judaism called Reconstructionism. Reconstructionism is a more modern movement, comes out of this is a test of my memory, I think it's the 1930s and early 40s, is a movement that was based on the teachings of a man by the name of Mordechai Kaplan. Kaplan was an incredible theologian who argued that Judaism doesn't exist because we have a relationship with God. Judaism exists because there are ways that Jews do certain things. And we don't do them because they are commanded, like we would say, out of the relationship. He says we do them because they're the Jewish things to do. He doesn't say that God doesn't exist. His thought is more that God may exist, may or may not exist, but we don't necessarily have any relationship with that God. And therefore, why do we do things? We do things because it's the Jewish way of doing them. That's actually a movement that was founded relatively close to here. Their headquarters are just outside of Philadelphia.
Oh, interesting.
And so you have those are the four major. There are a couple of other smaller groups that exist as well, but those would be the four mainstreams of Judaism.